Well, good morning if you are joining us from the United States, and good afternoon if you are joining us from Europe for this new episode of Out Leadership Global Pulse, which today is focusing on Poland. As you know, the situation on LGBT rights in Poland has been in the news in the past few months. And lately, in the past few days, there has been actually a strong reaction from the European Commission on what's happening in Poland on LGBTI issues. So I have the great privilege to have together an amazing panel which represent both activists and the private sector to talk about, first of all, what is the real situation in Poland and why it should be a topic of concern for anybody that is concerned about human rights. But second of all, what is the role of the private sector in a context like Poland? And frankly, what kind of steps could a local company or global company take to support grassroots movements in pushing back against the anti-LGBT rhetoric and now violence in Poland? So let me quickly introduce our panelists. I think Nancy Kelley needs no introduction. She's the CEO of Stonewall UK, which is one of the oldest and the largest LGBT organization globally that is actually paying attention to issues way beyond the UK. And so, it's a great honor to have you with us, Nancy. And I know that you're very busy, so I'm really grateful you're devoting this 1 hour with us. And then I have also the great privilege to have my friend Carlamaria Tiburtini with me. Carlamaria is a diversity leader at Avio Aero, which I think is the aviation division of General Electric, right? But besides that, Carlamaria, a few months ago, was one of the first persons that kind of convened a conversation about what companies can do to be supportive of social change in Poland and to maybe, in fact, be kind of a counterbalance to the way politicians have been using LGBTI people as political pawns in the country. And then I have the great pleasure to have Jakub Szymik with me. I think I mispronounced that a little bit, Jakub. But I should say Szymik? Well, I will let you pronounce your own name in a minute. But Jakub is a public affairs consultant. He's an openly gay Polish man, and he will also be able to give us an overview of what is really happening, and also maybe some bites about how the European Union response is, whether the European Union response is adequate or not. And then, you know, our last panelist, but not the least, is Łukasz Sabat. Łukasz is an activist with Polish. He actually lives most of the time now in Copenhagen, but actually currently is in Warsaw. Łukasz has been extremely vocal about how not insignificant the current developments are in Poland, not only for Poland, but also for the European Union, and then more generally for the human rights agenda. And what I also found particularly interesting in Łukasz's response is that he's looking at the moral dimension of the European Union. Can you be part of the European Union and have municipalities that are developing such strong hate speech? So let me thank all four of you for your time and generosity. You know, I am myself a little baffled by what happened. I am not sure I understand exactly what the situation is, and so I'm really looking forward to get a better understanding. So first of all, if you don't mind, Jakub, would you be able to give us a bit of an overview of the situation and also touch upon what are the latest developments when it comes to the response of the European Union?
Hi, Fabrice. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm very happy to be here with all of you and feel the solidarity from all over the world and from all over Europe towards the situation in Poland. I'd say that as an LGBTI community, we're into around 2 years of intense pressures towards our community in Poland. I'd say this happens on two levels, the national level and the local municipal level. At the municipal level, last year, lots and lots of local governments started adopting what they're calling protection of family acts, which aren't exactly legally binding documents, but still they are a soft law that is actually saying that that people that are LGBTI are not part of their community, and they will not accept them as a part of that community, which influences how the police works, the political climate around them, and makes lots of people not feel safe in their regions. This is about a third of the country, according to some of the activists. So this is the local level that is building the negative pressure towards the community. Also, there is the national level, which we are out of a cycle of political elections to European Parliament, to presidential elections, where LGBTI issues were one of the issues that were most important, and people were being polarized about them, like around them. So there were lots of shameful words from politicians about the LGBTI community, aimed at alienating this group and gaining some political power. Obviously, there are also people who like all of this peaked this August with arrests of some of LGBT activists who were protesting against a long 3 month, which is a maximum amount of arrest that could be for a person who was an LGBTI activist. The protests were actually successful. The activist was released early by court, but in the meantime, about 50-60 people were arrested and detained for a night and longer. Some of them only for being around the demonstrations, some of them only for wearing some rainbow items on them or bags. This is all confirmed by the Polish Human Rights Commissioner, which is one of the person who is supporting the LGBTI community in this narrative. He is fighting in courts against those local acts that are being adopted by the governments. And he's also doing the monitoring of this, what he's calling inhumane behavior by the police towards LGBTI people in Poland in August. Also, the EU is also acting. LGBTI intergroup in the European Parliament presented their amendments to the report regarding rule of law, state of rule of law in Poland, which was adopted today by the European Parliament with overwhelming majority. And also there are businesses that are also the part of the narrative in Poland. So there are lots of international companies that last year started to do their corporate activism and try to support their employees, and their brands were openly supporting LGBTI consumers. We're talking about Google, Coca-Cola, IKEA, and also lots and lots of other brands, but they also faced backlash with some negative comments from the members of the government, from ministers, with some additional controls by labor inspectorates and stuff like that. So also companies are a part of this, are also having some kind of responsibility, and are also, having this burden of being a good allies. But lots of companies don't feel comfortable doing this because of the potential political impact on their businesses and their brand reputation. So I hope this covers briefly all of the things that happens. And if you have any other questions, I'm happy to say more about this.
No, that's great. Thank you so much, Jakub. That's a perfect overview. And that actually leads me to my next question, which is to Nancy. So Nancy, what Jakub describes is not new, right? We have always LGBT, from the point of view of Stonewall, which has this historic engagement on LGBTI issues, and has also this global view. That's not the first time that we are framed as enemies of family and tradition. And that's not the first time that we are used as political pawns by politicians. So my question to you, Nancy, is from where you sit with this global view, why do you think this is worrying? Why do you think that we should pay attention? Do you feel that this is part of a wider backslide on human rights, and particularly human rights of LGBTI people?
So it's a big question, and I'll try and give at least a kind of starting answer for the conversation. So I think there's kind of two ways of looking at the question of what do the longer trends show us. And the first kind of tells you it's important to kind of not overstate the degree of backsliding. So when you look at the global trends, there's a fantastic recent report from OECD called Over the Rainbow. What you can see is that overall, in terms of basic human rights protections for LGBT plus people globally, we are moving in a positive direction, particularly over the last couple of decades. So we've reached past the tipping point where more than half of OECD countries have those kind of basic rights frameworks in place. So from a kind of global perspective, there is a positive trend. But at the same time, it's incredibly important to not understate the problem that Jakub is pointing to here, right? And Poland is obviously not the only place that is experiencing these kinds of very strong, very rapid regressive movements. So I think one of the things that we look at, and we look at in the UK context as well right now, is the idea that it's really clear from this that the trajectory of LGBT plus rights is not always positive. You know, we can't sit back and just think every generation it's going to get better or it's going to get easier, because it's very clear that things are going in completely the wrong direction in Poland, in Hungary, around trans rights in the UK. So that's really important. And I think it's also really important that there are connections across all of those instances that we're talking about. So in some cases, there are practical connections, there are organizations that are involved in all of these jurisdictions, but in other cases, there are kind of thematic connections between what's happening, and you're kind of pointing to some of the ways in which homophobic and transphobic movements across different geographies are characterized by some of the same things. And so some of the things that I would really point to is either formally or informally a more populist politics, and the narrative of culture war is common across a lot of jurisdictions. We're seeing really coordinated campaigns that are trying to narrow or retrench rights, and they often involve key institutions, so faith institutions, media institutions, etc. We see a narrowing of the space for civil society, defunding campaigns, direct attacks, and we see rising hate crime and hate speech kind of directed at our communities. And I think really just to say, here in the UK, we're contending with a kind of deeply entrenched anti-trans movement that has all of those characteristics. And on the international stage, we're becoming famous for being transphobic and for failing to move forward on trans rights, despite the fact that our public is actually, you know, general public attitudes in the UK are very positive, but that kind of organized campaign, much as in Poland, it's caused very regressive movements. We're seeing signs of that around trans people in the UK. And I think that leaves us with a lot of questions about what to do and what we do. But I'm going to kind of pause there, because otherwise I could talk all day about that. But I think, you know, overall there are positive trends globally. But the thing that is happening in parts of Europe right now, is not something that we should be at all sanguine about. There is a really urgent need to act, and act in a sustained way.
And you know what I love about your comment, Nancy, is that you point out that the biggest risk for us is complacency. That feeling of like, oh, you know, it's going to solve it itself, you know, and we don't really need to respond because, you know, the trend is positive. And as you say, you know, there is nothing that guarantees that progress is going to go in the right direction forever. So Łukasz, turning to you, you know, first I have a bit of a personal question. How does it make you feel to have such anti-LGBT rhetoric taking place in the country of birth? Do you feel, you know, do you experience it as kind of a personal attack against who you are? And then my second question to you will be, I have read how you have pointed out that it seems to be a contradiction for Poland to be part of the European Union and then to dismiss human rights of LGBT people. Are you happy with the response of the European Union, or do you think that the European Union has a bigger role to play in reminding what are the values of Europe?
Yeah, thank you. So to your first question about more personal impact, for almost a decade, I live in Denmark now, and I didn't realize how much internalized homophobia I had from growing up in Poland in such a hostile environment, even that my family is very supportive. until I moved away, right? And I could focus on my career, on my family life, on having my partner. And then now reaching the age where I'm looking back, okay, where I want to stay, what do I want to do? And looking back what happens in Poland, it's really, really hard. And it's not hard only on myself. It's hard on my parents who listen to this propaganda in the media. It's hard on my brother, on my sister. It's really hard on them as well, because it affects us all. So it affects the family, because somehow the government tries to show that we are just individuals that are disconnected from the society or the family, and that's not true. So it's really hard. And then I started to think, like, why is that I can have my great life in Copenhagen, I can focus on developing myself, on developing my company, but I cannot go back to Poland and feel safe. I mean, it got to the point where I'm here in Warsaw having some meetings with the Danish ambassador about Copenhagen 2021 that we're going to be hosting, and Poland will take a big part, because even a Poles living in Denmark, we start to gather together and say, you know what, we need to do something. We tried to escape from all this that was happening to us, but we realized we can't really escape until we help to solve it. So this is on the personal level. How does it affect me? On the second part, is EU doing enough? You know, it's always a matter of yet another unthinkable border that was broken, and you are in this situation where you thought it cannot get worse, and it got worse. And I'm thinking right now, oh my gosh, was it like 2008 that was actually maybe I felt safer when I was in Poland that I feel in 2020? Is that even possible? That what happened over all those years when I was expecting the progress? And things happened with triggering Article 7 about respecting the rule of law. And I must say that today I can say I'm really motivated and uplifted after the speech of Ursula von der Leyen, and what she said about that we are not ideology, it's our identity. You don't have to name Poland, but it's very, very strong. But my concern is, and concern for the LGBT people that I had occasion to talk last 2 days, is that we need to see what does that mean in action. Because our politicians right now on the ruling party, they start to using their media that they have full access to kind of downplay this. Oh, this is just a document that doesn't have any legal representation. We are based on the tractates and on those documents. So, in the one hand, I think it sends very strong signal, but we also need to see some exact. What does it mean exactly in the reality? But it's way more optimistic. One more thing, though, I know it's a very, very difficult situation, because the narrative and the climate around things in Poland, when you talk about LGBTQ+ rights, are that it's a Western ideology trying to be moved to Poland. So we need to be careful when we have supporters from outside Poland, that it's not being, you know, we have to think twice about if it's not understood that actually it is intervening in our internal matters. But seeing how many NGOs works here in Poland and on the situation here in Poland, it is really motivating to see this to see this support.
Yeah, and actually, Łukasz, I really like your last point, because you know, at Out Leadership, very often we tell our companies that it's not so much about grandstanding, which can backlash, right? But it's much more about quiet diplomacy and finding ways that maybe are not very visible, but to support grassroots movement, whether it's financially or by giving them advice. Meaning, you know, it's true that if you are Nike and you say, you know, LGBT people should be respected in Poland, there is a risk of it being instrumentalized by the government and saying, look, the Americans are trying to fight our tradition and our family. And the other point that really struck me in your comments, Łukasz, is that you started by talking about your family And then you started talking about the impact of the anti-LGBT rhetoric on your parents, on your siblings, which to me illustrate how artificial, oh, that's adorable. You know, I have Nancy, I love that, the little brat. And you know what I love with British children is that they wear uniform, which is always adorable. But you know, Łukasz, what I also love is the fact that it shows how artificial it is to oppose LGBT people to family, because in fact, and tradition, because in fact we love family and we love tradition. The fact that very often we are deprived of our community and our family makes us even more attached to our family. And frankly, you know, who celebrates the holidays better than gay people? So I think there is something very artificial in opposing family and tradition to LGBT people. So Carlamaria, I think Łukasz kind of gave an opening to the question of the role of the private sector. So you were one of the first one months ago to try to convene a conversation with companies about this topic. First of all, do you believe that the private sector can play a positive role? And second of all, are you concerned about the risk of backlash that Jakub described in his introduction, that IKEA and Coca-Cola are experiencing, which is that it could be perceived as, you know, global multinationals pushing a depraved Western agenda on Poland?
Yeah, thanks, Fabrice, first of all, for invitation, and thanks to all my colleagues on the webinar today. So let me tell you a couple of thoughts. I think that in terms of LGBTIQ employees plus rights, this decade has seen a positive sea change with business companies constantly anticipating lawmakers. That's a fact. And if we look at Fortune 500 companies, for example, so companies have introduced non-discrimination policies based on sexual orientation, and a high percentage of them have definitely gone farther, voluntarily extended health and benefits to all their LGBTIQ plus employees. We, for example, in GE, we did the same. I mean, we did that. So this is just to give you a flavor of what we do internally. It's true that Europe has also seen its fair share of progress, but despite this encouraging progress, a lot remains to do. I'm convinced that businesses need to support the cause because the waste of human and economic potential is immense, is huge. And it's all about human capital, talent, and business opportunities as well. So I wanted to stress the importance of being an ally with the affinity group, as we call it, or the RG, as other companies call it, because at the end of the day, companies do not end up working the issues only in those countries where it's comfortable because of social acceptance. And also we in Avio, Aero, in GE, we recognize that and we are working on that because that's not enough. I mean, it's easier, you know, but when it comes to Poland, then it's a separate, action. Last but not least, let me say that companies and multinational companies can do that and must do that. They need to walk the talk for real. I mean, pink washing is, to my opinion, simply unacceptable. And we want to be the game changer. I want to work to build the right ecosystem. So coming back to your second point, I think that we as a multinational company present in those countries, we cannot ignore it. We cannot at all, because it's part of our DNA and our internal rules to protect our people everywhere where they are. And this is a way to do it.
Thanks a lot, Carlamaria. I have to say, I love your response, you know, and it's so crucial what you say, which is that we constantly see companies that are such champion of LGBT rights when it's comfortable, and really turn a blind eye as soon as it could affect their business, or they feel it's a bit, it goes against the culture of the land. And so I love your response. You know, there is a question in the chat from James that I would like to address to you. And basically what James is saying is, would you recommend to employees to try to reach out to the management of their company and say, could you be part of a coalition that is either supporting financially grassroots movement, or at least try to think about what you can do to contribute? You know, basically his question is as an employee, do you feel that employees have a responsibility to push their company to do more when human rights of LGBTI people are threatened?
Is it to me?
Yeah, I'm kind of directing it to you. I think it's directed to all of us. I mean, you know, from my point of view, I have been saying for a really long time that I think that employees are gaining power in companies. And when you see what happened when Google employees walk out, you know, on issues, even though there is a bit of a pushback at Google right now, you know, my point of view is that yes, if you are an employee, you should use the power that you have acquired.
Well, you know, I think it's a two ways, Fabrice. I mean, it's a two ways conversation. Employees, we as company, as management, let's say that we have to put, we must put our employees in the right condition, feeling that they can express everything they feel. And so to put them in the condition of being able to be who they are or who they want to be. So I think it's our responsibility as managers of companies. Then once that is created, then employees has got the right and has to raise their hands if they feel uncomfortable or if something. But this comes only when the right culture is there, when there is the right environment, when they do feel protected. Otherwise, they will never do it. So again, for me, it's a two-way conversation, but it starts at top down.
Nancy, you had some thought on this?
I did. So colleagues on the call might know that we work with 1,000 diversity champions, 1,000 companies, and 220 of those are global companies. And I guess one of the things that we've seen over all the time we've been working with companies around issues of LGBTI inclusion, we've seen employee affinity groups and employee reference groups. So where the companies are safe, where LGBT plus people are able to come together to talk about their experience both at work and in the wider community, those groups have been able to play a really incredible part in driving global policy for their companies. So I think it's kind of bridging some of the things that Carla is saying. That safe environment enables a coming together of LGBT plus colleagues, and those colleagues can then become a real driving force and a real partner within the organization at the most senior level globally. And I think that's just really important to point out. It's not individual employees having to shift huge companies. It can be us coming together and working together to partner with the leadership in our company in a really effective way.
Yeah, I really like that. Yeah, I have to say that I have seen employee resource group. Go ahead, please, Carlamaria.
No, sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's a time zone, I think. I want to stress one thought again, because I think it has to start with internal communication as well. So that is, for me, first, internal communication to all employees. And that helps also for the branding. But in Poland, for what we can see, it's just vice versa. I mean, the politics is highly impacting the internal environment. And this is not simply acceptable, you know what I mean? So in order to help our employees to feel that they got the right to raise their hands and they feel protected, we need to change the paradigm. So internal communication first, and don't mix the internal with the external, and don't let the external impacting too much. That's what I feel right now, that the external is too much impacting inside the companies.
Great. So Jakub, you know, I have two questions for you, which are kind of following on the overview you gave. First of all, do you think that there is a bit of a risk for LGBT activists to dissociate the violation of human rights of LGBT people from a widened pattern of violation of human rights in Poland, whether it's on reproductive rights or whether it's on the press, right? Freedom of press, right? You know, we did a bit that mistake in Chechnya, in which we acted as if LGBT people were the only target of the dictatorship, when really, you know, all human rights are under attack in a place like Chechnya. So first of all, isn't there a risk to just single out LGBT human rights when really all human rights are under threat in Poland? And then my second question is linked to what Łukasz pointed out, which is that social attitudes are lagging behind in Poland, meaning that there has been high levels of homophobia even before the government instrumentalized it. You know, and isn't there a risk too that we only focus on the political aspect and forget that social attitudes are lagging behind?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for both of those questions. Regarding the first one, I'm not really sure we are actually at the same, like Poland is still a member of European Union that has a reasonably high standard of rule of law. And also given the declines that are possibly happening during last months and last years, I'm not sure I would say that Poland as a country is some kind of, you know, like very big human rights offender. I'd say that the difference when it comes to LGBTI rights in Poland compared to Western Europe, for example, and to other EU states that Poland is a part of, is the fact that in Western Europe there are some basic, you know, legal protections for LGBTI families. There are civil unions. There is marriage equality. There are some hate speech protections, and this is just not what we're seeing in Poland. So what I see is a growing divide in the old EU and in the new EU when it comes to the reality that people of my age, for example, are living in and the opportunities they have. And I think that this is the most heartbreaking, the most heartbreaking thing for me to see that it's really difficult to connect, because those are two very different realities, even though we're part of the same institution. So I wouldn't like to comment on some other human rights infringements because I am not an expert on that, and I'm not sure that it is that difficult. This is not my experience. When it comes to wider homophobia in Poland, I wouldn't say that there is. I'd say that what we're witnessing right now is just an effect of a very wide activity by internationally linked right-wing NGOs and organizations that are channeling the minority homophobia into a very well-organized social movements. Historically, Poland is one of the first states globally to decriminalize homosexuality in 1932, which is way earlier than, for example, UK. And also, so this is not to say that that there is no history of institutional homophobia in Poland. I'm just saying that the progress in Western Europe was way faster, but it doesn't mean that we as Poland and Polish people are deeply homophobic. We all have families who care for us. We all have friends who care for us. Maybe not all, but many of us. So I would sway away from the narrative that homophobia is something that is the only experience that we're having in Poland. We also have lots of support, and I would also like to underline this. Also, when it comes to history of homophobia in Poland, I'd say that before democratic transformation during communist times, obviously there was organized action against LGBTI people, which was called the Hyacinth campaign, which is a mass operation in late 80s aimed at gathering information about Polish homosexuals, and official reasons was counteracting the AIDS epidemic or combating prostitutions, but in the end this was a hate campaign organized by the state in the late 80s. And also when it comes to the data that we're having, currently 68% of Poles support same-sex civil unions. And there is obviously quite a wide cohort of LGBT plus MPs and political figures, and their sexual orientation seems to be less and less of a matter for their voters. This is not the main platform that they are running on, or this is not the main platform they are being received by the voters. I'd say that the lowest rate of acceptance is for the adoption of children, which is why also the progressive politicians are not underlining and emphasizing this aspect in their communication. And this is an issue that is not present politically in Poland at all. Everyone is afraid of that. And obviously in the business community also there is really not many openly LGBT plus executives, and there is a little culture of corporate D&I programs. So I'd say that Polish local companies are not used to sharing their values, and they just say that they are keeping an eye on doing business, not taking all of this wider spectrum of well-being of their employees, for example, into consideration. And just to commenting on all the things that were mentioned during the debate, I said about the growing divide within the EU, which I say is important also for the perspective of Stonewall UK that we're having. I think that the very important thing we're talking about here right now is helping companies and international, multinational companies to understand what is the Polish context and to make it, to make their engagement local, to make their engagement meaningful, to have risk management strategies for their brands, and also sensitivity to what they can, like what is expected from them in Poland. And on one hand, this is really progressive because this is not only about CSR, this is about doing a real change and doing real works that help people locally, but at the same time, this is about securing your business. And this is why also in my work as a public affairs consultant and government relations consultant, I see that there's lots of the tools that we're using to help companies manage that. So this is issue monitoring. This is doing a very well translated documents into Poland that are taking into consideration our local language, local impact of the companies in a way that helps them secure that they are not saying something that is absolutely out of reach and in a very different language that Polish political spectrum is using and is accustomed to. So I'd say that it's important for the companies to remember about the ways they use their communications here in Poland, so it seems local, and obviously like there are people who are ready to help with a very sober navigating of this issue by the companies, because I'd say that lots of corporate activism, as all of you mentioned before, is being perceived as a foreign influence on our Polish values, and it's important for the companies to be aware of that. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think, Jakub, you actually give the best illustration of the need for local voices and local organization to be in the lead by correcting my assumption that the rule of law is fragile in Poland, and also by correcting my assumption that you know, most people are experiencing high levels of homophobia when you point out that there is also an entire segment of the population that is very supportive LGBT people. And I think that's always the risk, right? Is that from the point of view of the UK or from the point of view of the US, that we end up caricaturing the countries that are in the news, right? And so so I think that the best lesson, here is that for private companies that are willing to play a positive role, probably the first step is to get in touch with local voices and local organizations and ask, how can we be useful? Which actually, Nancy, is a perfect segue to my next question, which goes to you. And that question will be, concretely, what do you think that companies can do to, if tomorrow after this webinar, someone at Goldman Sachs calls his leadership and says, I would like for us to explore what we can do in Poland or how we can assess the situation. What do you recommend to the thousands of companies you work with when it comes to decide to contribute to a movement or to assess what they can do in a difficult context?
So helpfully the main thing that we do is put them in touch with local NGOs so that they can support locally in exactly the way that Jakub is describing. I think there's a lot of different aspects to this. So one of the things, and comes back to what Carla was saying earlier, when we're advising companies that are working in complex contexts like Poland, but including places like Singapore, places where criminalization is still an issue, etc. The first focus is on supporting them to be able to create a safe environment for their staff and sustain a safe environment during a period of time when there might be kind of external pressures. And I think we've talked a bit about how that might be playing out in Poland at the minute. Is trying to make meaningful local connections, both with NGOs and human rights institutions, but also with other actors in the space. So I think that, it's important for us that where we do work, we do it from, through bilateral relationships. So we get companies to work with us to pressure the UK government to talk to Poland, for instance, rather than intervening directly in kind of Polish governmental affairs. What we do know is that for some companies, as they've built up over a long period of time a lot of competence around LGBT rights in specific jurisdictions, they are then able to really effectively use their own governmental affairs offices. And I think it is really important to listen to what Jakub was saying about that. That's not the first thing that you do, because you're probably not sensitive to context. But I think you can build to a situation where corporate advocacy can be highly effective, because bluntly, large corporates are far more influential on governments everywhere, including the UK government. And in fact, a lot of our advocacy is corporate advocacy at the minute, than NGOs, however long or illustrious our history. So I think there is maintaining that really safe staff environment to protect not only your colleagues, but their families and their communities. There is engaging and supporting local NGOs, and I think being mindful of how overstretched they are in difficult contexts. So often money is a really helpful thing to do, and it is definitely something we always encourage corporates to engage with. And then as there is more understanding, and over time, for some companies, the right thing is typically behind closed doors, we would advise kind of using governmental affairs avenues to try and create a more positive legislative and policy environment for LGBT+ people.
Yeah, and so at Out Leadership, we share your view that sometimes quiet diplomacy for the big corporation is the best way to go, and coalitions are great. And what I love with the initiative of Carlamaria is that she brought in the room companies that typically do not really do business together or are not in the same industry, and said, we are more powerful as a group than, and particularly I think Carlamaria focused on trying to get a mix of local companies and multinationals to say, look, we represent various industry and we don't really think it's good for business, nor is it good for the economy. Now, there is a specificity about Poland, which is that the economy is doing fairly well. In fact, it has been one of the most resilient economies in the face of COVID-19. And so that's a bit of also a strange situation. Now it's also an economy that is very dependent on foreign investment, as you mentioned, Nancy, and that comes back to the point of the influence of those companies. So Łukasz, turning to you, well, first of all, you know, your response has been, you have been very proactive. One of the things that you did is that you tried to kind of mobilize the diaspora, you know, in the Nordic countries, which is really smart because the diaspora, you know, knows the context and also has influence outside of the country and has influence in the country. But given your relationship with local organization in Poland and your network, in your opinion, what do the organization that Jakub mentioned, you know, the wide number of NGOs that are working locally to resist the degradation on human rights of LGBT people, what do you think that they need the most? And do you have any idea of where big companies can be helpful?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm coming from the business environment, right? So I'm thinking also from that perspective, which maybe sometimes is not exactly the same way of thinking or alignment within an activist groups. But when I was talking with some NGOs, and I think all my fellow panelists mentioned that, it's the work with NGOs. What I heard those recent days here is that the government is cutting fundings to those NGOs, so they don't have an access even to the EU funds in a way. So any work with supporting them with the projects on psychological help and support that they are offering to the community, I think it can bring back with building of what the business is or the company that you work or represent for is, that it's a safe place to be working as a LGBTQ person, because you cannot grow business, you cannot develop if you don't feel safe, if you are in fear. But another thing that I was thinking, what business can do. So yeah, supporting the local NGOs, but what I think is missing the most, as you said, Poland has a quite strong economy still. It's a hardworking nation. I know myself, long hours, but I'm missing one thing. That thing is a dialogue. Solidarity was possible because we had a dialogue back in the 80s between different groups. Right now, the example of that is that presidential campaign. There was no debate of two main candidates. They were talking separate with each other. So if the business somehow can support the dialogue between the parts with the politicians to show that as an antidote to LGBT free zones and those hate, educate that, you know what, you cannot build a strong business without diversity and equality in the workplace. This is what you really need, because the environment is changing. We got COVID, we got lockdown, we have a climate change, a lot of things that will be happening in the business. And the only way to, I see, restrain that is the diversity in business. So a little bit like on the political side, what I think bad thing happened at the beginning when Poland started to have those LGBT free zones is that the supporting cities broke the partnership. And I don't think that's a good way. I think that's the problem where we stop discussing and we lose opportunity to educate and to talk.
Well, Łukasz, that kind of brings me to one of the questions that is in the chat, right? We had a question from Magdalena, who said that because, you know, one of the things that you said is that companies have the opportunity to talk about how diversity is good for business and good for the economy, and that therefore political action against diversity is actually detrimental to business. But one of the things that Magdalena points out is that right now, the specificity of Poland is that when you talk about LGBT rights, it feels like you're talking about politics. And a lot of business leaders say, well, politics should not be discussed at work. And so do you have any suggestion or anybody on the panel on what would a manager respond if someone in the company said, well, that's a political debate that shouldn't be taking place in the office?
That is the hard one. That is really a hard one. I can see that that it became a political statement, and it shouldn't be. Somehow, the discussion about LGBT rights become associated with left-wing political views. And I think we need to get back to, no, this is not the case. This is a human right. There are people within the LGBT community with the different political views, and this is not politics. Maybe because it was used cynically right now by the politicians, it kind of sticked.
Yeah, but one of the responses there was, Łukasz, which actually kind of echoed something you said at the beginning when you talked about the internalized homophobia you discovered after 10 years in Copenhagen, is that Nancy says, go back to the human story. Go back to the fact that when there is anti-LGBT rhetoric, our children have to listen about their parents being stigmatized on television, that it has an impact on children, on our well-being, on our capacity to make a living, on our capacity to be safe. And I think Nancy Kelley made that suggestion, and I think that's crucial, right? Is that it is so easy to put us as other, undeserving human beings. But I think when you see the face of Jakub or you see the face of Łukasz and their personal story, then you realize that those are people that just want a life, and we are people that just want a life of dignity and opportunity. The same thing than any other human being wants. And so it cannot be a political issue if, it's our personal story that homophobia ends up making it impossible for us to achieve our potential in life. So my next question, and I want to thank Magdalena and Nancy for discussing this in the chat. So one of the questions in the chat, Carlamaria, is whether you have plans to open that discussion you've been holding. So there is a question from Joe Meyer who said, could you provide information to participants on the coalition with Carlamaria? My company has been thinking about ways to do this through other channels, so any leads are welcome. Do you plan to continue having this conversation? Are you looking for other companies maybe to take leadership on bringing together local and multinationals to think about? I think one of the things that Jakub described is that it's not about responding this week. It's about more, building a coalition of companies that are working with NGOs and that help. Do you have planned, Carlamaria, to continue your engagement on this in bringing companies together?
Yes, definitely we do, and you are free to give my contact to anyone on the chat or participant. Be free for that. But I think it's important also to understand the rationale and our approach if it can be perceived as a best practice. So in Avio, Aero, and General Electric, we think that what makes the difference is the way of doing. So coming back to what one of my colleagues said before, think and act globally, which is underscoring the business benefit of diversity locally and adopting global policies that make the world safe, fair, and equal. So what we did in Avio, Aero, and still doing, we adopted an inside-out approach to Poland because before going external, we need to understand how our people feel. So listening, a climate pulse, internal communication action, and trainings to change a culture. And again, and that's the case of internal and external stakeholder engagement. at the end of the day, Fabrice, if you feel not at ease in your country, as Łukasz was saying, but also you don't feel at ease in your company, how can you even think of making a change? So on the contrary, if you feel not at ease in your country, but at least you are feeling safe in your company, that's the way to keep the hope high to change things. And even if you don't have and obtain and reach the change you are looking for and you're looking at, and it doesn't come immediately, at least you feel inside your company in a sort of safety zone, a dignity zone for yourself. And this is in this, there we think, and I think that the ecosystem, the coalition of companies is definitely important because it helps to create a safety privileged zone for our employees. So big companies like us, they got the strength, the tools, and the right impact to change the world. And at the end of the day, it all starts from us. It all starts with we want to get it right. So we will launch quite soon an internal campaign. We will launch a series of cultural trainings and at the same time, in parallel, working on allies externally to build this coalition with other companies. So thanks to you and your help, we already got quite big numbers of them. So we will start. So anybody who is participating to this webinar, please feel free to reach me out. It won't be tomorrow, but it will be definitely. So we are, our project is in a couple of phases. So we needed to do it internally first and then outside. But in parallel, we are working with NGOs and external and other companies like us.
Yeah, and so, I think Carlamaria, that this is a great recommendation for company, which is first clean house in your Polish office. And then when you have done that, look at what you can do outside of the wall of the company. Listen, we are kind of at time. So, you know, I want to thank very much Jakub and Łukasz, first of all, for fighting for your brothers and sisters at home. You know, I think that's crucial. And then I want to tell you that we are, you know, we are in it with you. You know, a fight against LGBT people anywhere is a fight against LGBT people everywhere. And so the fact that Nancy of Stonewall took the time to join us today shows, you know, that all the big LGBT organizations globally are keeping their eye on Poland, and we are at your side. And then Nancy, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the work that Stonewall does. You know, it really matters. Your daughter is adorable. I just wish I could put my son in uniform, but unfortunately, I think the US won't adopt uniform there. And Carlamaria, you know, thank you for your allyship, because you know, you are an extremely passionate ally, and it matters. You know, for LGBT people, allies are our only way out of very often, and so your allyship matters. And you know, I don't know if Jakub, you want to say a concluding word, and then I think we have to bring it to a close.
Yeah, so thank you all for coming in and joining in. I also urge you to contact me in case you want to know more about how to work in Poland. For Polish-speaking people, me in cooperation with Grupa Stonewall and in cooperation with Wolontariat Równości, we prepared a good corporate allyship guide for international companies that have their local communications people here who want to know how to do a good allyship that is aimed both at the LGBTI community and at the same time doesn't harm the the brand reputation in Poland. So if you want access to that, please find me via LinkedIn. Or
I would be delighted to put you in touch through me.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. So this is the final word for me. Thank you for your engagement, and do it the smart way, please.
Great. Have a good day, and I hope we see you soon. Thank you again. It really it was really for me a key event to have that discussion in Poland, and I'm really grateful that you participated.
Thank you all.
Bye bye. Ciao.
Bye.